Vihinu Amadonai Eloheinu Eleinu Maaseidinu Konna Aleinu Maaseidinu Konnehu. Vihinu Amadonai Eloheinu Eleinu Maaseidinu Konna Aleinu Maaseidinu Konnehu. This is the going to be the first shiur of the uh, what will be at least a year, 52 weeks, maybe a few extra in there for the holidays. Shiurim that I'm going to do in honor of Amanda and who she was. Um, and I'm still toying with the title because this is what Amanda always wanted was Kabbalah for the layman, um, or layperson, however you want to put it, the average human being. Um, so what are we going to be learning? Uh, as I stated in the eulogy, there were two main questions people asked me through the week of Shiva, um, which uh, one was how did Amanda maintain her faith through, especially through the last 5 years of her epic battle with cancer, and the second question was a lot like it, was how did she maintain her hope and joy? Um, I'm hoping that through this series of shiurim, like there's no way I can answer that in a single shiur. I'm not sure that I can answer that in 52 or more shiurim. Um, but I'm hoping that through these, those two questions will gain some sort of answer. So, to start to understand that, I think two things are important to be said at the start. Um, when I met Amanda, she was already a woman of faith. It wasn't like I met somebody who had no idea of anything and, helped her grow into the awesome person she was. So I can only really speak with any authority to the growth in faith that Amanda experienced with me through our marriage. It's important to understand that from the very beginning of our marriage, Amanda was essentially a havruta to me, a learning partner. Uh, when we were initially talking and dating, she was kind of frightened. I had Smika for I think a year, I think maybe 2 years by that point, and she was kind of a little nervous to be a rabbi's wife and everything that would mean. So straight away and through some circumstances with us getting married on the West Coast and me coming from the East Coast in the United States and needing to get stuff and just the price of airfare versus the time that we had and all of that, we wound up actually driving back and forth across the country several times. Um, and so uh, during those trips, she would sit in the car and study when she wasn't taking a turn at the wheel. She would study my Smika notes, and when she was at the wheel, she'd ask me to read them to her, and she would ask questions and all of this. And I think I mentioned a lot of this in the eulogy. If not, I should have. Um, so with that, fairly early on, she she had a really solid and firm grasp of halakha and Jewish law and how it's derived from its various primary sources. Um, and then through the uh, as we then went through the process of making Aliyah and me studying Kabbalah, Dayanut, and all of that in a kollel here, that process of us learning together continued um, to the point where I would honestly say, um, and not to just make her sound like more than she was, that except for in a few areas that she really didn't have any interest in, that didn't interest her, like Milah, when I learned Brit Milah, Dayanut, a few things like that. She was, in most respects, my equal in learning, and definitely my equal in understanding. Um, if you knew Amanda, you knew that because she spent so much time raising kids, that she struggled with Hebrew, and Aramaic was pretty much outside of her wheelhouse. But if I could translate it for her, she could understand it, and uh, she did. She understood. Like I said, I would say, in many cases, she understood these things to the point where very often, if people would um, call or write to me or write asking various halakhic questions, she would answer them herself, and then just like initially when we were first married, she would check with me to make sure she got it right because she was a little nervous about this, and then as time went on, unless it was something really complex um, that needed like more of an actual like pasach halakha, she would just answer the question herself. Um, so uh, she started that with me in the realm of halakha, and then is one of the reasons we made Aliyah is because I wanted to study Kabbalah in some of the best yeshivot for that in the world, which happened to be here in Jerusalem. Um, and so as I delved into the world of Kabbalah, she went right along with me in a lot of that. So that required for me initially in the early stages a lot more studying at home and trying to keep up because I went from yeshivot in America where you read the Hebrew and all this read American speed and with English translation like you read and translate to an Israeli yeshiva where not only is it all in Hebrew, as in you read the text and you're expected to understand it and not translate and make sure we're all on the same page, but then all the explanations are in Hebrew. So I hit the ground running with that, but it took me a little while to fully get my feet under me, and so I would do a lot of extra study at home, and she would always ask me what I was studying, and the beauty of Amanda is she was always a very practical person, and so like a lot of people hear Kabbalah and they think it's out in the sky mystic somewhere, um, and the truth is that the true study of Kabbalah, it shouldn't be some just esoteric knowledge that you've picked up that gives you warm and fuzzies. 'Cause if you understand what is being said, and we'll get into this more as these shiurim go on, the idea of Kabbalah is to help us live a better Jewish life in the here and now. And she was always really good at saying, okay, but what does that mean? Like, what's the practicality of that? That sounds really cool, but like, um, how do you do that? And with that, I think my understanding of Kabbalah and the more mystic aspect of Judaism really evolved well beyond what it would have otherwise, and and it allowed me to succeed in these yeshivot in ways that I don't think I would have without her. Um, so I'm not going to talk about me on this. So I'm going to talk about her. Now, yes, it's I've heard that it's often said these days that it's looked down upon for women to study Kabbalah. Um, I, I hear that. Uh, I'm not going to be McCloud the kavod of any Rav that says that. Um, uh, though all I can see is all I can say is I've seen many of my own rabbis studying at home and their wives asking questions and even challenging their statements um, and then when at least one of my early rabbis who was a Talmud of uh, uh, sorry, who was a Talmud of Rabbi Sharabi, he Mordechai Sharabi, the first Rosh Hashiva in Nahar Shalom, when he was giving shiurim in his home, 'cause he used to give private shiurim in his home, his wife would be in and about the house, uh, and in the midst of his shiur, she would ask questions, and if one of his explanations didn't quite to us as students didn't quite meet uh, something she remembered him saying before, she'd actually call out to him and say, "Hey, you explained it better when you said blah blah blah. You should tell them that, and they'll get it better," and things such as that. Um, and we'll get into again. There's so much I can cover, and this is why it's going to take a full year. Um, but up until really recently, when the the various Kabbalistic Shavot have decided to try and, for whatever reason, go more mainline Haredi. Women always had some sort of place. Now there may have been divided space, men and women, but they've always had some sort of place within that world. Um, the a really famous lady was for this was Leah Sharabi, Rabbi Mordecai Sharabi's wife. Uh, she was known to be able to give um, answers on deep Kabbalistic questions, uh, and there was even a book written about her. I can't remember the name of it now. One of my friends, when I was visiting America, showed it to me of how she was essentially almost like a Hasidic Rebbe to a lot of women. Um, Specifically, she would interact with various seminaries here in Israel and teach women the more spiritual aspects of Judaism to try and draw them deeper into their Judaism. Um, so there was a story of um, Rabbi Shach, the Rosh Yeshiva Panovich, came to Jerusalem, and he was spending Shabbat or having Shabbat dinner at Rabbi Mordecai Sharabi's house. And Rabbi Mordecai Sharabi, his minhag was to have women and men sit together and, from what I understand, give drashot. Both the women and the men would give divrei Torah at his table. So, um, Rabbi Shach and I guess a couple of his Talmidim are there, and as the dinner starts going, they realize that women are going to be sitting at the table with him, and this wasn't done in the Haredi circles of Bnei Brach. Um, and so Rabbi Shach leans over and says to Rabbi Sharabi, this isn't really appropriate. Men and women sitting together. I'm not comfortable with this. Something along those lines. And so Rabbi Sharabi says, okay. He calls his wife over, talks to her privately, and has her go set up a another table in the kitchen area. Um, and then once she comes out and tells him that's done, he turns to Rabbi Shach and says, "The table's set up. You're free to exit the room whenever you would like." Um, which I think is funny, as in Rabbi Sharabi isn't going to change. If the women are welcome at his table, if you're not comfortable with it, you can exit yourself. Um, and in all honesty, this aversion to women in these more learned circles seems to be a newer thing. Uh, and uh, I'll circle back to that in a minute. So, with all that being said so far, these shiurim will only ever really be just a series of vignettes. And what do I mean by that? No matter how many shiurim I did, I don't think I could ever truly pack nearly 16 years of discussions and joint growth into all of them. Uh, it just that just doesn't. As I think on it, that doesn't seem possible. So what I'm going to do through these is to focus on key texts, ideas, and discussions that I believe were profound moments of enlightenment for the both of us. And when I say the both of us, I really do mean the both of us. Um, no matter what was discussed, no matter what was learned, I think I learned as much from her as she did from me, and back and forth that way. Um, and another key aspect, and this is where I said I would circle back to this, is that the Arizal and the Itzkayim, and we'll get into this in greater detail further on, explains how the dot. So in Jewish thought, you have um, the uh, well, everybody. I think everybody's in Judaism has heard of the 10 Sefirot. Okay, so we'll leave Keter aside from now, and so then you have the three mochin, the three brains, and this there's even a famous sect of Hasidus named after this Chabad, Chokhmah being a da'at, right? And so the Chokhmah um, in 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 the Chabad Arizal, the Chokhmah is corresponds to the right brain, the Bina corresponds to the left brain, and the Da'at corresponds to the medulla oblongata in the back, right? So that's the three brains, and also the pituitary gland and things like that, that right in the middle of it. The pieces of the brain that join the other two spheres together and help them communicate back and forth between themselves. Okay, like the amygdala, blah blah blah. I can go into like, if you really want a biology lesson, another time. So the Arizal says that, and I've heard, I haven't actually dug up all the studies. I've heard this is true that the that in men and women they function different. They chemically function differently. Um, Again, I'm not sure if that's entirely true. I remember even when I was doing psych back in the day, that was kind of a working theory back then. It also helped to explain homosexuality in that, like, basically, a man who was a homosexual, again, I haven't been in this world for 20 years. Things may have changed. Um, what was going on in their brain was more chemically in those specific areas, like a woman and blah blah blah, and vice versa for the other way. And okay, enough of that. But that's at least on the spiritual level. The Arizal says they operate differently. Uh, and I hope I haven't offended anybody too much so far. Um, So one of the things that comes down in Kabbalah then is that there is a feminine aspect of Torah. There's a masculine and feminine aspect of Torah, and where they meet, so the masculine aspect is called, when the feminine aspect is Binah, and where they meet together is called Da'at. That's where you have the true understanding. Okay, um, and I think what you find, and the reason why many of these Kabbalists studied with their wives, and why I found it also to be such a profound experience, is that you need both the masculine and feminine aspects to truly understand Torah on um, on a whole. So then we come down to what is, I would say again, part of the a more modern problem, which is the ban on teaching women. Um, and to prove that's a modern problem is, we can go back to Devorah in the Tanakh, but I know we don't poskin by the Tanakh, blah blah blah. So we have uh, several women in the Gemara, the the source of all Jewish law, essentially, that were major scholars. Sadly, I can't remember all the names of them right now, but the one that really sticks out to that I do remember, and I always bring this one up whenever somebody says that you can't teach them, it was a lady named Baruria. Um, she there's a story about her in Pesachim 62a, um, where she so she asked 300 sages 300 questions in a single day. So, um, and she was known to be able to. Uh, Her son, I believe it was, once was asked a difficult question, and he told his by one of his students, and he told his student, "I don't know. Go ask my mother." Um, so that was huge. Moving on a little further down the line, roughly by about 1,000 years, you have Rashi's daughters, who many of whom were noted great Torah scholars. And then, like I said, I have the proof of my own rabbis and what they did in, and I saw with my own eyes of them teaching their wives. So now that we've covered all of that by way of introduction, probably the longest introduction yet, I'm going to get into the first text that I think was really uh, pushed Amanda and I forward some. So the story behind this is I want to tell these is also stories is uh, before I met Amanda and before we got married, I had already studied Kabbalah some, mostly in Osir Chaim and Shara Chavanot, which are usually the two books that most people start in. And then when I moved to Israel, when we moved to Israel, sorry, um, I quickly found myself in a Kabbalistic yeshiva where I was studying Dayanut and other advanced halacha, as well as started doing the deeper studies of Kabbalah in the Sefer Eitz Chaim. Um, and so there's a lot of stuff, like a lot of most people start Eitz Chaim further in, and there's a lot of stuff people skip. And so I was at home um, going through all the stuff they skip, and this is like the very first line, and it blew my mind. And I told her, "Wow, this is like in this one line." Well, here, let me read it and translate it, and then I'll discuss it. So this is Sefer Eitz Chaim Shar Klalim, um, Perek Rishon, the first chapter. Kashe'ela b'rutzono yitbarach. So when it arose in the will of the Blessed One. Um, Lavro et ha'olam k'dei lehetiv levaroav. So to create the world in order to be good to his creation. V'yachiru gedoloto, and so they would recognize his greatness. V'yizku liot merkava lamala lehidavech bo yitbarach. Um, and that they would merit to uh, be a chariot for him, for the supernal, and also to cleave to him, or yeah, embrace the whole the blessed one, God, right? So, um, if you've ever studied philosophy, almost all of philosophy is based on, at least classic philosophy, based on two primary questions. Um, why are we here, and what is our purpose? As in, like, what were we created for, and what is my individual purpose? Um, and the two are very close, and the Arizal states this again later on in more depth. But this one line, it blew my mind, as it answered all of that in such a profound way. And so, again, let's, like, when we look at it, so God decided one day, essentially, and yes, I'm using anthropomorphic language. Um, you will later on in his kind, we'll talk about in other texts, we can talk about that and why. But to understand any of this, you have to use anthropomorphic language. So God decided one day to create the world, okay, and so that's the who, and then the why is because he wanted something to be good to. He wanted to be able to be good to his creation. um, namely us. And then um, moving on with that, he had also planned for us that we would know him in his greatness, and that we would be able to be uh, a vehicle for his presence, and and to cling to him, and to have Lihidavech, like this is from where we get the Jewish concept of devachut, this connection, this personal relationship with Hashem. Um, so I found that extremely profound, and then I explained it to Amanda, and she also found it to be extremely profound. Um, and the reason is it does answer all those questions, and it does give us a certain understanding of that. Uh, and now this is where we start branching off in the greater depth of um, what does it mean to be good to. Is, if none of you, I don't know who's going to listen to this, and I don't know how well many of you knew Amanda or not, but she, if you're listening, you probably know that she had passed away to cancer. Um, uh, and that she fought that cancer for a solid 5 years. Um, but she always, and part of that is from the understanding we got from this and other trials we'd gone through before that. She always understood that cancer to be a good thing, um, to be a blessing in her life, moving her forward to being a better person, and opening her ability to be that vehicle for Hashem into the world. And I think that is one of the most profound things that you could take away both from that, and there's other places we can get into where we talk about this more. The the Torah talks about it a lot in the halachot of Kaddish, specifically talking about Yeheshme Rabbah, that his name will be magnified. And what that means is, and why we say it in the language we do, because when we say it, he says the angels stand in awe. That up until then they can accuse us that we're proclaiming the greatness of God, but then we say this line that means even though we don't understand right now um, that the world is good and everything that happens in it is good, and on in that day and when we B'tichat Metim and Yemei Mashiach, when we have that next Aliyah, um, then we'll see that it was all good, even the things that seem the most horrible and incomprehensible now. So it's a statement of ultimate faith, and yes, Amanda and I did wind up talking about that, and we'll get to that more in its place, because I think this idea of ultimate faith um, in the goodness of God, it deserves its own shiur at some point. But from from those early days, this was I think about 14 years ago when we first made Aliyah, and I studied this. She began almost immediately to endeavor to see everything, no matter how hard the circumstances, as God being good to us in some way. Whether it was a chance for us to see His goodness because He would bring us through this, or it was a chance for us to experience His goodness because He was helping us grow into um, better people spiritually. Okay, and I think that was rather profound to her and to me. And in fact, I think many times, um, especially early on, and also often through this cancer battle, she did a better job at it than I did. Um, to be honest. Is if you if you've only ever looked in on the, the Kabbalah from the outside, um, there's a lot you might miss. A lot of people look at it as like a lot of esoteric stuff and whatever, but the vast majority of what Kabbalists do, or anybody who is serious about the study of Kabbalah, I'm not sure I would call myself a Kabbalist at this point, is things called tikkunim, which is like fasting and praying and things like that. And very often when um, you have troubles, uh, the rabbis and the Rosh Yeshivot will encourage you to do a certain tikkun or whatever, to fast, to pray, and without sounding too weird in any of this, um, throughout our life, we had seen um, a lot of things that could almost be called open miracles from things like that. Of I'd fast, I'd pray, and financial problems would dissolve, or you do the fasting, the praying, and one of the child's health issues would resolve, or whatever, various things. And so, you know, when she got when she was diagnosed, of course, that's the first thing, right? Um, and uh, one of the biggest fasts you can do, or one of the biggest tikkunim you can do in there's two. One is a week to week fast, so you stop uh, ending with Havdalah. You don't eat or drink until uh, uh, Kiddush the following Shabbat. So that's like 6 days without eating or drinking, which it is difficult. I won't lie about that. And then the other one that's a lot more common is like a 3 day um, absolute fast as well. And all these have special prayers attached to them and things like that. And you wear sackcloth and various things. And so when she was first diagnosed, I initially did a week to week fast, and then after that, I did several every other week for about 3 months. I did a series of 3 day fasts, uh, and her. Well, any of you who know the story know, like, with each of her diagnoses, I did something similar. Um, but I think it was after the on the third recurrence. Because up until then, we'd been getting positive prognoses, right? Like, okay, we did this. There is cancer. We're gonna do this, and then you'll be better. Or okay, it came back, but no worries. We can still beat this. We're gonna do this, and that should take care of it. And then the third one was the one where they said, okay, it's not gonna go away. Um, and at that point, I hit a low point, to be honest, because I was doing all the stuff and wasn't getting the results that I wanted. Um, and Amanda, in her ultimate goodness, looked at me and said, "You need to get over it. Um, you can't let bitterness build up inside of you, and you can't be angry with God, um, because there's so much good that's coming out of this, and you need to start letting yourself see that." Um, and that was one of the profound moments for me, is realizing that I think that she had learned some of the lessons of Kabbalah better than I had, um, because one of the lessons of that you'll see repeatedly through Kabbalah. Like I said, even it's even brought as stam halacha by the Torah in the halachot of Kaddish, is that we 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 believe that everything is ultimately for not just the good, for the best. That everything is from heaven, hakol min shemayim, and that it's for the good. Um, and so it's up. Then it becomes up to us to try and understand that, and and in that uh, is how you. I think, not I think, if you saw Amanda as she went through this battle, it's how she did the rest of this, right? So she got the goodness of it, and through that she was able to become a vehicle for for the presence of Hashem. I mean, she touched so many people's lives through her various actions, whether it's people she met in the hospital, people she met in various cancer groups. She really did shine a light that burned so bright. Um, and in her darkest moments, she clung to Hashem. Um, and I think that was, yeah, that she embodied this line of, um, receiving his good and knowing his greatness, um, and meriting to be his vehicle in this world and to cleave to him. Um, I think if you look at her and what she did and how she lived through these 5 years of fighting cancer, um, she did all of that. And not only that, but she saw so many opportunities for tikkun midot, to improve herself through it. So that's the first text that, like, it blew my mind, and then as she and I discussed it and really pulled it apart to understand these various parts and looked at some of the other texts that I've talked about so far, and that we'll delve into more in future shiurim. Um, she got to the essence of it, and not just got to the essence of it, she embodied it. Is that is the ikr of learning. Um, there's a line in the Gemara that comes down as halacha in the Shulchan Aruch, that if you learn but don't apply your learning, it's still like, you can learn the halachot of something, or if you're just learning to learn without learning to actually apply it to life, it's bittul Torah. Meaning it's as if you didn't study at all, right? And so, uh, in all honesty, I almost stand in awe of her, and I do stand in awe of her, not almost. I stand in awe of her that she took this and learned it, and so profoundly applied it in her life.